Good morning, everyone. So we are going to have a discussion on around 5 questions which have come from economics. In fact, 6, I should say. Question number 1, 2, 3, 5, and then question number 11 and 12. Okay. Before we start question paper discussion, there are a few general remarks that I would like to make. The purpose of any discussion of this sort is not just to give you the answers to the questions which came, because clearly year to year the exact question may change. What is also important is to get whether there is a pattern which is continuing in the question in last 4 or 5 years at least or so, and what are some of the myths etc. that needs to be kind of taken care of while you are attempting it. So I'm mainly thinking of the audience of the discussion to be those who are going to write the exam in future, not just those who have written it. Okay. So what we are finding in economics is there are a few types of questions which are being quite repeated, like land reforms, okay, which is coming almost every year. This year also they asked, even if the exact nature of question may be different. Then the questions around socio-economic issues, although this is not, paper 3 is not a paper related to social issues much, but economic and social issues can be interconnected. And what I keep on explaining in my class, what we call the interdisciplinary questions, they are coming more and more, and economics questions gels very well with the questions around social issues, geography, sometimes linked to political as well as historical aspect. So when you are even writing paper 3, one message is clear from the question setters that don't expect questions only on core economics. While core economics is important, also expect to link it with the social aspects, with the political aspects, etc. Okay. There is another myth which I have been already talking about for a long time, that simply doing current affairs on economics is going to sail you through, which is completely wrong. Okay. Again and again in mains every year, this myth is being broken, but for some reason still students think that current affairs will be enough. If you look at the nature of questions which are being asked, there is hardly any question, maybe one or two in some part, which can be answered merely on the basis of current affairs. Like, I think this is a good point to start the discussion. Look at the first question. Examine the pattern and trend of public expenditure on social services in the post-reforms period in India. To what extent this has been in consonance with achieving objective of inclusive growth? You have to answer in 150 words. First of all, look at the question. It itself has 2 parts. You have 150 words, so roughly you have say 70-75 words each for each part of it. Although you can spend more space to the first part of the question, maybe 100 for first and then say around 50 words for the other. In such a question, you have no scope to beat around the bush in any case. Ideally, you should not do it in any question, but all the more, so straight away come to the nature of the question. So in any such question, the keywords must be looked into: pattern, trend, public expenditure on the social services in the post-reforms period. Post-reforms period means 1991 reforms. So basically they are asking about post-1991. I hope you realize that you cannot answer the question simply because you have read, say, social services expenditure in last 1 year or 2 years, etc. You have to do Indian economy in slightly greater detail as a regular reader of the economy. Although when we say post-91, one can say that why can't we include even now, because now also is post-91. Well, the clear-cut message of the question is that how the post-reforms period is different from roughly the pre-reforms period. When we are examining the pattern and trend, although they are not writing pre-reforms, but that is the meaning. And given around 100 words to answer, even if you write down properly on post 91 versus pre 91 decade, it will be needing a lot of work. So I will not advise you to go into very recent data here, although you have freedom to do that. And those who just do that, I'm sure it will not be a correct answer. You should be focusing more on that. Pattern means what? Pattern means what type of, first of all, public expenditure means government expenditure. Pattern as in what are the types of social services on which the public expenditure or government expenditure has been made. For example, you can mainly divide it in expenditure on education, expenditure on healthcare, or a number of other things like family welfare, rural development, etc. The list is actually longer. I'll give you some data related to that as well. Even here you can include housing, food subsidy. These all expenditures can be regarded as the types of the social services. Trend word is basically telling that you have to give some figure. And that is a little tricky one, because the problem is that remembering all the figures is always difficult. So although I'm giving the figures to you, I completely understand that possibly each and every figure may not be remembered. So even if you remember a few of them, you can quote them in that particular context. So there are a couple of tables that I give to you. Before tables, one more thing. In public expenditure on areas like education, healthcare, or even other social services, the role of states is much more than the role of center. Simply because most of them are in the state list, therefore the states contribute maximum. Center also contributes, but not more than around 1/4, less than 1/4 in fact, most of the times. Now, why that is important? Sometimes just center's expenditure may give us an idea that it is improving. So just giving you some data first. Here I am giving you a table related to public expenditure. In brackets you can write center plus states. As a share of total expenditure. On social services. So obviously all this data may not be exactly remembered by you, but even if you quote a few, it can be enough. So like when we take just pre-91 time period, roughly around 1986 to 91, and compare it with the immediate post-91, which is around 1991 to 2002, we find that on total social services, at least this much you can remember, on total social services, there has been increase from around 11% to about 14%. These are all rounded off figures, because even if you remember rounded off figure, that's a big thing. As in 11% of the total expenditure was on social services in the pre-91 decade, or say 7-8 years before that, which is increasing. So that is where we are talking about the trend, okay. The overall trend is showing an increase. Even if you don't remember exact figure, approximate can be remembered, and you should always link this with the other aspects of economy then. Don't forget, the late 1980s time period is a time of kind of building up to BOP crisis. In any case, government was under a lot of fiscal pressures, etc. By that logic, it is likely that the expenditure would be less compared to when the post-crisis time period comes in, when the economic reform started. And don't forget, more of this increase came after 95-96, by the time that GDP growth, etc. is very high. What happens when GDP growth is higher and it's coming from sectors like industries? The tax revenue collection is quite significant. That makes it possible for the government to spend on the social services. Although that is not a sufficient criteria. In fact, in some areas of social services, we have actually seen a decline also. But in most of the cases, we have seen increase after 1991. I'm just giving you some figures selectively here. For example, in education, from around 1.7% of public expenditure in pre-91, 2.2% after 1991. In healthcare, from around 1.3 to 1.5. Increase, not very significant, but at least increase is there. Similarly, it increased for most of them. But when you look into rural development, the rural development as a share actually decreased, although marginally, from around 2.6% to 2.3%. One hint of this is that the rural development is not receiving a lot of focus within the social services. In rural development, you can think of many rural employment schemes, and that also fits very well with the another debatable issue during the 1990s, that of jobless growth. Although the question is not asking that, I'm just giving you a hint that by chance if you are getting some questions around that, you can link it with this. Lower rural development expenditure is hinting about lesser rural job creation in post-91, resulting in one of the reasons behind the jobless growth, one of the main reasons actually. Okay. Although the question doesn't end here. After that, you also have to give, by the way, you can give other figures also, you can give percentage, the public expenditure as a percentage of GDP, which is not increasing much. You can say that in this time period, 96 to 1991, public expenditure on social services as a share of GDP was about 2.6%, which increased but only marginally to about 2.7%. So public expenditure as a share of GDP is almost stagnant, which basically means that although in value terms, although the expenditure is increasing, but that is also because the GDP growth is very fast. As a percentage of GDP, it is marginal. One more thing, this increase mainly came from the center's expenditure. And you can quote a number of examples over here. For example, the midday meal scheme, which started after mid-1990s. Midday meal scheme was a big role player in health-related expenditure. You can quote the World Bank initiative on primary education, again in mid-1990s, which encouraged the educational expenditure, etc. So these examples can be quoted why the center's expenditure is mainly responsible. What is interesting and surprising is actually the state's expenditure as a proportion of both total expenditure and GDP decreased. For example, just to give you a figure orally, in 91-92, in 91-92 we were having about 35%, rather 35.4% of state's expenditure on the social services, which is falling to 34% in 2000-2001. So what we are trying to say is that overall expenditure on services is social services increase, but the state's expenditure is actually decreasing, although marginally. Similarly, the percentage as a share of state's GDP is also decreasing, although marginally. From around 5.8% of the state's GDP, the share of the social services expenditure is coming down to around 5.7%. From 5.8% of state's GDP, to around 5.7, which is again a marginal decrease. So the other thing, unique thing that we see is that most of the expenditure on social services from government is coming from center, not the states. Okay, but this is only half of the question. Try to summarize it as much as possible. Each and everything need not be written. Then the question asks, to what extent has been in consonance with achieving the objective of inclusive growth? So for that, you first need to give a brief definition of inclusive growth. Although you don't have many words, so you can't afford a lot of space here. After writing all that, maybe you'll have hardly 50-60 words limit left. But still, I think a brief definition will structure your answer better. Inclusive growth fundamentally means that growth should reach everyone without any kind of a discrimination, be it on the basis of region, be it on the basis of gender or other aspects, and so on and so forth. Generally, we'll expect that social services will be in consonance with the objective of inclusive growth, and to some extent it is happening also, but we cannot say all the things happened in the way that it should have. For example, we cannot say that quality of social services increased. Like quality of education still remained, if not dismal, you can say it was less than expected. I'm sure you have read a number of surveys related to the quality of education in India, which repeatedly says that. Then you can also talk about inter-regional disparities still remain. For example, the spread of education and health facilities is clearly not up to the extent in each and every state in that way. Gender disparities, for example, also exist to a great extent, like male versus female literacy rates, etc. Although they are closing, but still very significantly different in the 1990s. So you can give both the sides. Since the question is asking to what extent, you have freedom of giving both viewpoints. You can briefly say that to some extent, the social services expenditure is leading to inclusive growth. Like you can quote the higher enrollment rates coming in, the nutritional aspects improving, etc. Even the gender gap in literacy rates decreasing and so on. But then you can at a later point also write down that there are many things which are not there. And also the fact that rural development expenditure is less, that is not ensuring another feature of inclusive growth, which is equitable urban and rural growths, etc. Well, such a question can be easily asked in a 250 marks also. I think ideally it would have been better to write more on this, but I know in examination it is always difficult to get a number of figures. But this is an example of figure-based question, at least the first part cannot be answered without that. Okay, let's go further and talk about the question number 2. What are the causes of persistent high food inflation in India? Comment on the effectiveness of monetary policy of RBI to control this type of inflation. Now, although a very easy question, the question remains interesting for the reason that it is one of the rare times that we are finding a question on monetary policy in mains exam. Normally on monetary policy questions have been asked in prelims, not many in mains exam. But in the class on monetary policy, etc., at least the second part we discuss indirectly, even in the food inflation. So the question is not talking about any time period, if you notice. Okay, you cannot call it's based on current affairs, because persistence high food inflation in India can be taken back since 1960s, 70s itself. the times of Green Revolution when it came up. And according to me, the reasons even now is somewhere interlinked with decades. You cannot explain food inflation only in a matter of what is happening in last year or last few years or so. The question itself is telling persistent, although there is no exact definition of persistent as in for how long, but it means actually for a long time period. One way to answer this question is to look into two sides of it: demand factors, supply factors. Generally in economics, when we look into answering something, we often take up this kind of a fact. Demand factors as in, here you can talk about the increase in demand for food grains, with increase in per capita income. Particularly you can say that in the post-reforms time period again, that per capita income has increased. Recently you can also add here increase in demand for high value food items like milk, vegetables, fruits, meat, etc. These are also the factors here. But agriculture is often driven more by the supply factors, and within supply factors mainly on the nature of monsoon. Indian agriculture is still fundamentally monsoon dependent, and you can quote a number of figures if you wish from the geography classes on the area under irrigation, etc. But try to be brief, because in 150 words again you have to answer two parts of that. Okay. Then it seems that persistently higher food inflation can be both due to demand and supply factors. But supply factors have often mattered more, okay, because almost after a duration of few years, we have always some drought year when the relative things don't go well for agriculture. In supply factor, you can also bring in the factors like transportation, etc. So the transportation bottlenecks can also be responsible for higher inflation, or storage bottlenecks. If storage infrastructure in agriculture is not good enough, the inflation is likely to be very high. So you can quote all these things: transportation, storage, the other infrastructure related to agriculture, like marketing also. Agricultural marketing basically includes everything: transportation, storage, sale, mandis, etc. In India, supply factors seem to dominate more, okay, in the sense that there are more bottlenecks on that side compared to the demand. Demand factors may also be important. However, supply factors seem to dominate more in case of the higher food inflation. In the latest consumption expenditure survey, we get some support on this argument also, that the share of expenditure on food items, which was very high earlier, seem to be decreasing. Meaning thereby perhaps demand factor on at least food grain prices seem to be relatively less important. You can use a little bit from the current affairs part also in this case. And then the next part was comment on the effectiveness of monetary policy. Anyone who understands monetary policy is aware that it's a policy related to interest rates, how the interest rates are being decreased or increased. And interest rate related policy is mainly impacting the sectors like industries or the services. I agree, even in agriculture loans are taken, interest rates are important, but it is more impacting the prices in the industries and the services sector than agriculture. In any case, the passage of agricultural credit to the prices is slightly longer. Empirically, it has been seen that agricultural credit is one reason behind deciding the agricultural prices, but only one among many of them. Okay, so can you see monetary policy will be effective in controlling inflation if there is availability of cheaper credit, if there is better availability of cheaper agricultural credit. Something that has happened, I agree with that, we have priority sector lending giving cheaper agricultural credit and so on, which is also technically a part of monetary policy. Priority sector lending etc. can be given as an example of qualitative monetary policy, which is trying to control this type of inflation mainly by ensuring that the agricultural credit related things are streamlined. Okay, but fundamentally monetary policy is not enough to control food inflation. Why? Because most of the supply side factors are where the monetary policy is not effective. In supply side factors, the monetary policy is not much effective. Anyone can think of it logically, even if you don't have a proper economics background. How can monetary policy impact the nature of monsoon? Or even to a great extent transportation, storage and other infrastructure bottlenecks, except providing them credit. In India, the lack of transportation, storage etc. is not only because the credit is less provided, but due to many other policy related issues which are there. So all in all, you can say that to a very limited extent monetary policy can be used to control the food inflation, and that is the reason despite having relatively tight monetary policy, if you see in the last few years, the monetary policy has been mostly very tight and contractionary. Despite that, food inflation has kept on increasing, although we have seen fluctuating trend, sometimes very high, sometimes relatively lower. But still, it doesn't seem that there is a direct correlation between a tight monetary policy and lower food inflation in India. Not surprising, because supply factors are not under control of the monetary policy. That's where the role of government, more direct role of fiscal policy comes in, and so on and so forth. Again, you were not asked to write on that, so avoid it. Let's move to the question number 3 now. Okay. The question number 3 was about land reforms. As I told you, this is one of the most common questions coming almost every year. But every year when they ask it, it is slightly different. This year they are asking factors responsible for successful implementation of land reforms in some parts of the country. Okay, question is slightly tricky in the sense that overall land reforms, it is often claimed, were not very well implemented, okay, across the country, yet there are some parts of the country where it is implemented better. A good way to answer such a question is to first identify which are these some parts. Okay, if you are not ready with what factors you will have to write, this is how you can begin your thinking. If not writing, at least your thinking. These some parts can be mainly in terms of West Bengal. West Bengal is known for successful land reforms in a big way, particularly the tenancy reforms. Apart from other land reforms, the tenancy reforms were very well implemented in West Bengal as well as Kerala. These two are considered the bright examples of implementing tenancy reforms. Here I am not discussing types of land reforms because that's not being asked in this question, but you should have that in the back of your mind. So what were the major types of land reforms? Abolishing zamindari system or intermediary system, tenancy reforms, which was supposed to empower the tenants, those who are not having their own land, to cultivate the crop. Then we had ceiling reforms, ceiling as in beyond a point of land area, the area will be taken back by the government, and also the distribution of the land to the landless people. That was ceiling reform. Then later on came in 1970s consolidation of land holdings. where the smaller land holdings had to be consolidated for better productivity. Keep it in the back of your mind. The question is not asking to enumerate it, so no need to do. You can bring it according to the need of the question. You have limited number of words. West Bengal, Kerala, very well known for tenancy reforms, even other land reforms, but more for tenancy reforms. There is a very interesting example of Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, in Jammu and Kashmir also land reforms were in general well implemented. Particularly we are talking about the ceiling reform. Okay, ceiling reform was about keeping upper limit on the land area and then redistributing the rest. Then comes the states like Punjab and Haryana, which are known more for their successful consolidation reform. The consolidation of land holdings were done in a much better manner. Even in western UP to some extent, we had seen that happening. Well, the examples can be more. For example, Maharashtra is known for decent implementation of land reforms. Use your information according to how much you know about the state-specific implementation. Maharashtra, Karnataka, Assam, these are other examples where land reforms were reasonably well implemented. If not the best, unlike the earlier, these were reasonably well. Now, this will give you an idea that how can you approach the question. Then you can look into why there were factors that led to successful land reforms. Okay. Well, according to me, you can divide this answer into 2-3 parts. You won't have more words to write. One is political. So, if they ask what are the factors responsible, according to me, the most important factor would be the political factors. Okay, because clearly the so can you see, it is not entirely a question on economics. It is a question which is a good mix of the political aspect of land reforms as well as others. Political will was very important for the success of land reforms. How can we say that? We see that in the sense, you can give many examples. Like West Bengal implementation is mainly by late 1970s, when the Communist Party of India forms government. Clearly there is a better political will with the CPI government to implement the land reform. A similar thing you can say for Kerala also. Kerala and West Bengal both has been under the communist government for a long time period, and it clearly mattered. In a similar way, in Jammu and Kashmir, when the Naya Kashmir policy was being launched under the Sheikh Abdullah regime, then there was a lot more political will to implement the land reforms than earlier. So you will see political will throughout being the most important part. Okay, even in other cases that you talk about, you will see some role of political will. Even in Punjab, Haryana, etc., better political will to implement the consolidation reforms. And then you can elaborate further why there is better political will in West Bengal, Kerala. These governments came up more on their pro-laborer policies. They portrayed themselves as more in favor of the workers' class, etc. And that is why it was important for them to justify through the land reforms. Okay. And similarly, you can give examples from other areas. But you can give some other factors also. Another factor that you can add here is historical. History has a big role actually to play in the success or failure of land reforms, in the sense that the land revenue systems that were there under the British rule mattered that how successful or not the land reforms will be. I think the best example of the historical factor is the consolidation reform in Punjab and Haryana, in the sense that both Punjab and Haryana were having what we call the Mahalwari system as their land reform. And if you go through your history syllabus, Mahalwari system means that the land revenue was collected from mahals or the villages as a whole, not from the farmers individually, unlike the Raiyatwadi system, or even the Zamindari system was different. Historically, from Punjab, Haryana, etc., the land revenue collected was from a bigger area, the mahals, the group of villages. That is why consolidating land holdings became easier there. Something that we don't find equally well in the areas where Zamindari system, etc. was there. Still, if you talk about eastern part of the country, which was majorly under Zamindari system, West Bengal is notable exception, where consolidation was better than, let's say, states like Bihar and even eastern UP. So political factors are important, yet consolidation in West Bengal is not as good as Punjab and Haryana. So only political will is not enough, the historical aspects were also important. You can give similarly some other examples if that comes in your mind from the history syllabus and the land reform. Like Jammu and Kashmir can have crucial historical reasons why the land revenue systems like sealing became more important. Okay. Then comes social. Another factor that you can add here are the social factors. Clearly, some social factors make a lot of impact over here. For example, what is the average land size of the farmers? As in, are we talking about land reform in the agricultural area dominated by small and marginal farmers or the big farmers, and so on and so forth? Similarly, you will see that in states like Kerala, social factors mattered a lot. The society of Kerala, for example, is where even the landowners class find it more acceptable to implement the land reform. Okay, obviously that was not the only reason behind it, but that was one of the reasons that the states like Kerala were socially much more advanced even in the say 1960s and 70s and so on, that they did not kind of created much hurdles for the land reform. Actually, these examples will come more when you are writing on failure of land reform. In many cases of northern states, the social factors were important. The landowners class never wanted to share their land or even the other revenue benefits with the relatively landless classes, which became an important factor for failure. You can give the reverse in the context of, say, Kerala, you can give it in the context of West Bengal. You can give the social aspects of agriculture in states like Punjab, Haryana, etc. It is not a very kind of obvious question. The only good thing about this question is the area where question is coming is expected, okay? But the nature of the question is forcing you to think more than that only, okay? Let's go further. The next question, the question number 5, I think, yes, was about intellectual property rights with respect to life materials. So the question had again 2 parts. What is the present world scenario of IPRs with respect to life materials? And then the second part was asking you that India is second in the world to file the patents. Despite that, why only few have been commercialized? Explain the reasons behind this less commercialization. So again, I identify the keywords: world scenario on the IPRs with respect to life materials. Basically, life materials that they are talking about is where they are talking about plants, animals, etc. Even biotechnology related or biological resources, basically, etc. Now, what is the world scenario? Basically, they are asking that under what convention or agreement, etc., these things are being taken care of in the present time in the world. you can mainly quote here two types of examples according to me, and definitely you can have more of it. One is the UN Convention on, so these are guided by IPRs on these. Plants, animals, biological resources are guided by first the UN Convention on the biodiversity, biological diversity, and second is the TRIPS agreement of WTO. In fact, in the last decade, there is a link between them that is also coming in over here. So then you can briefly write that what exactly the UN biodiversity agreement is talking about, which is more a part of your environment related discussion. It was agreement clearly to protect biodiversity, and that is why UN Convention on Biodiversity was more liberal in giving the freedom related to IPR to the countries itself. Or basically they gave government freedom that you may avoid IPRs in this, with the idea that with IPRs attached to these plants, animals, etc., that may negatively impact the biodiversity. That is why the countries are given more freedom over there. Then came TRIPS agreement of WTO. Okay, so indirectly this question also needed the knowledge of WTO, topic which I cover in the GS classes, etc. In TRIPS agreement, we are talking about certain articles. If you know the articles, you can quote them. For example, Article 27.3 of the TRIPS agreement is linked to the plants, animals, or biological resources, etc. Initially, TRIPS agreement was of the view that we should not go for the IPR, strict IPR protection of plants, animals, etc. However, things started changing from around the Doha Ministerial of 2001. The Doha mandate, or Doha Declaration as we call, Doha Declaration of 2001 was the first formal acceptance within WTO that we should seriously look into the IPRs related to plants, animals, etc. But it is only by 2011, okay, it is only by 2011 that there are more productive steps coming in, like extension of patents in these things, in life materials, etc., beyond wines and spirits. Earlier, there were only wines and spirits related patent protection that gets extended after 2011. India had a crucial role to play. Okay, India has been one of the favorites of the patent on these life materials, etc., because we are likely to benefit more from there. There is another thing that comes in around this time, geographical indication. It is only talking about IPR. So IPR can be anything, patents or even geographical indications. The introduction of geographical indications concept in TRIPS agreement, GIs, actually was important in ensuring the life material. So you must have heard of geographical indications protection for a number of varieties of plants or plant-based products or animals, etc. There is another debate going on this, which is about whether we should be having the genetic resources being protected or not. Okay, particularly the debate around country, the origin, the country of origin in the genetic resources. Developing countries like India or even Brazil, etc., are in favor of bringing in the country of origin in genetic resources as a protection, because India knows that it is home to many of the traditional knowledge where it can benefit from such protection, something which is not very much in agreement with the developed countries. So don't write everything, because again there are two parts of the question. You have only 150 words. The second part is talking about reasons behind the less commercialization of the patents in case of the Indian economy. First of all, the second part is not just talking about IPR in life materials. It's a general question which is asking what are the reasons behind less commercialization. So you can give a number of reasons related to that. For example, average time from the patent application to approval is very high. You can quote some data if you remember. For example, in India, it takes on an average 58 months, roughly 5 years time period you can say, between applying for patent to get the final approval. This is roughly 3 times that of US, China, etc. In countries like US and China, around a 20 months time period, 20-21 months is taken. So you can compare that. In cases like Japan, South Korea, it is even less, around 15 months time period. So this can be taken as one of the biggest roadblocks to the commercialization of the patents or IPR. Other things are also interrelated, like lack of manpower. It's difficult to remember data on all this, but if you have, you can quote that also, that how in the patent offices there is lack of manpower. Lack of manpower in the patent offices. That is why it takes a long time for patent to be approved. There is no fixed timelines for different steps in patent or patents approval. Suppose that one time they ask a question like, what steps do you propose to improve commercialization of IPRs in India? You can reverse these arguments. Okay, because IPR related question is not coming every year, but it is still somewhere in the mind of the examiners, and the questions have come earlier also with reasonably good frequency. A number of other reasons can be given over here. For example, there is lack of IP awareness or IPR awareness among the businesses. It means that even if patents are provided, using those patents by the businessmen is a big challenge. Like the small industries, the MSMEs, etc., they are not much aware of the IPR. Even if they are aware, the cost is higher. Okay, so there is higher cost of IP litigation. Although the government of India has been quite proactive in encouraging patent protection in India, and things are actually improving, yet in this question you have to explain the reasons behind less commercialization. Commercialization is mainly linked to the final parts that I talked about, like why it is not being used by the businesses, awareness and other things. But remember, commercialization is also dependent upon how many patents are actually being approved compared to the applications which are being. So second only in order to file patents, but filing patent is not enough. The approval is also important. There is only about 3% of patent which gets commercialized, okay, which is relatively low figure compared to again the countries like US or China. Okay. So I think that would be enough to write around say 70-75 words, which was required for the second part. Let's move to our next question, which was on labor codes. Okay, that was a easier one and well expected. One question on employment is coming every year, maybe more than one. Okay, and in any case, we were expecting something on labor codes, which can be regarded as somewhat linked to current affairs. However, not just current affairs as in last year or so, because most of these labor codes are now at least 3-4 years old. The question was asking about merits and demerits of the labor codes in the context of labor market reforms, and then how has been the progress so far in this regard. You have 250 words, so more space to write over there. Whenever you have 250 words question, you can enjoy the freedom a little more in order to elaborate. Like, I would say a good way to start the answer would be to explain what is labor market reforms. Labor market reforms refer to the reforms that simplifies the labor laws and makes it less numerous. Simplification, less in number, but ideally you should also write a phrase in the end, without sacrificing the labor welfare. I would say this last phrase is very, very important in the sense that there is no point simplifying labor laws or reducing the number if labor welfare is being sacrificed. Remember, you are creating a platform for the last part or the second part here of the answer. Since you know you have to talk about demerits also, you can create a good platform, a structure of your answer in this manner. Okay. Although, forget about this question, this is ideal explanation of what is the labor market reform. Let me justify that. If all these things happen but labor welfare is sacrificed, one can argue, why then have labor reform? Remove them also. Let the industries hire and fire labor according to their complete freedom. So if labor market reforms are brought in, you cannot ignore the sacrifice of the labor welfare, which is a common mistake many of in many discussions of labor reforms that we make. Then you come to the two main parts, merits, demerits. But obviously for that you will have to first discuss what are the labor codes. You have enough words here, at least better than the others, so you can go in some detail of it. For example, you can talk about the labor codes which are given in 4 parts. Okay, the labor codes which are given in 4 parts. These 4 labor codes have replaced 44 labor laws that were there earlier. A small thing, some discussions say 29 labor laws. That was because the 44 minus 29 got repealed and then the remaining 29 got restructured into the code. So don't get worried over that. What are these codes? Code on wages, code on social security, code on industrial relations, and code on occupational safety, health and working conditions. Occupational safety, health and working conditions. Okay, you can even say that while the first code was brought in 2019, the other 3 in 2020. Okay, fine, it's a minor thing. Code on wages got implemented first and then the remaining. The question is mainly about merits and demerits. Merits clearly will be more systematically discussed through the different codes. For example, you can start with what are the merits of code on wages. You have 2 options here. Either you can talk about merits as a whole, okay, which is also fine. When you are talking about these merits as a whole, you can talk about it can ensure ease of doing business because there is simplification of the labor laws, etc., the businessmen, the industries have to fulfill lesser legal requirements, etc. Okay, or you can even say that relatively the wages have been increased, and that is the reason why it is not even sacrificing the workers' welfare. One more claim of government is that these all labor codes are also benefiting the unorganized sector. So it is also for unorganized sector, although this is somewhat debatable that whether all unorganized sector is benefiting from here or not. Labor codes are still fundamentally more for the organized sector compared to the unorganized, but still the government claim has been similar to that. So that is a general set of merits, you can say, or you can also go code by code. Like in wages, you can give merits like the minimum wages have been raised, okay, not just for organized but also for the unorganized sector. Then you can talk about a number of other initiatives which the government has taken, like review of minimum wages will be there every 5 years. There will be some kind of minimum 50% of the cost to company as the wages, etc. So that the companies may not just give other benefits and cut down on the wages, etc. Then similarly in social security, you can talk about the role of pensions. Okay, there is more pension benefits being given through the EPFO initiative, even for unorganized sector. Then you can talk about the spread of ESIC hospitals for better social security. The employee state insurance company provides the hospital facilities, often free of cost. So that is being widened further under the new labor code. Under industrial relations, you can give the examples like the industries are being given more flexibility, like earlier under industrial dispute resolution, what used to happen is under dispute the resolution act, the moment there are more than 100 workers in an industry, they needed a government approval before firing any worker. That approval is now 300 workers. So only when there are 300 workers in a particular industry, the government approval will be needed. You can use it somewhere in the demerits part also, I'll tell you why. But generally it is said to be merit, because every time that the company is firing the worker, it doesn't need to go to government. Even if it is a relatively bigger industry, say hiring 150, 200 workers, etc. So that can be quite beneficial to the industries also. Then for within industrial relations, you can again, and social security, you can again talk about that government has provided unemployment benefits if there is a job loss. Okay, a scheme by the name of Atal Bimit Vyakti Kalyan Yojana, you can quote that. Atal Bimit Vyakti Kalyan Yojana, which is like an unemployment allowance being given to the jobless people. And similarly in the occupational safety health working condition, the claim has been that there are better levels of safety requirements being given. Well, if you start writing even 1 or 2 benefits, merits, it will be enough. So roughly what you can say is that in 250 words, you can keep progress related thing as a little brief, maybe 30 words or so, 30, 40 words. And then the remaining 200, 210 words you can spend on merits and demerits. So say around 100 words on merits, 100 words on, by the way, you can't spend 100 each, because some word would also go into explaining what is labor market reform and what are the labor codes. So I would say maybe 80 words each should be enough on merits and the demerits by that logic. What kind of demerits can be talked about here? In demerits, you can talk about a number of things like there is a feeling that increase in the number of workers, which I was talking about, 100 to 300, this will benefit limited number of industries. You can quote data, etc. According to ASI data, the annual survey of industries data, this change will be benefiting hardly 10% of the factories. So hardly 10% of the factories are going to benefit from this. And the reason for this is not surprising, because Indian industrial sector is known more for the smaller industries rather than the bigger ones. Okay, and that is the reason why the limited benefits are going to happen in this case. There are other claims also that come in here, like lesser role of the labor unions. Another demerit has been less role of labor unions. For example, the codes talk about the negotiating parties whenever some policy is to be decided. That is where it is said that not more than 5 labor unions can be part of negotiating discussion, meaning thereby the role of labor union is clearly decreasing in the context of the new labor codes. You can then talk about the lack of freedom being given to go on strike. Workers can't strike without 40 days notice. I know you will say that, shouldn't it be taken as a good thing? Depends on how we look at it. If strikes are being deliberately done to stall the work, possibly that may be a good feature, but somewhere or the other, the ability of workers to go on strike or contest the employer's decision is problematic. Another demerit can be given as it encourages contractual labor, not just contractual, other part-time jobs. The labor codes are actively encouraging lesser permanent employment, more contractual, more part-time, etc., which can negatively impact the quality of employment in the country. Although, again, it is debatable that whether all contractual employment is of bad in quality, still that gives more authority in the hand of the employers to handle that. Okay, and then the question was about what is the progress so far in this regard. Well, the problem has been that most of them are being implemented late. There is a problem of late implementation, and one of the main reasons is lack of states' consent. Since labor laws cannot be implemented properly without the state government's consent, that is where center is facing a lot of problem. Many of the states, particularly as you expect, the ones which are managed by the opposition parties, are highlighting these demerits more and claiming that their earlier labor codes or labor laws were better than that. Let's not forget also that some of the states individually have also gone for labor reforms, whose claim is that center's labor reforms are not needed. They already have a better set of labor reforms and so forth. So this is the main issue which is bothering us at this point of time. But still, more of the discussion is on the optimistic side here. Okay, and had the question not been asking demerits, you should have focused more on the merits of it only. Okay, and that takes us to the final question in the discussion that I am doing here. What is the need for expanding regional air connectivity in India? That was the first part. And then the second part was asking about, in this context, discuss the government's Udan scheme and its achievement. So two things, regional air connectivity need, and then what is Udan scheme, what are its achievements. Okay, so 250 words again, you had enough space to write. First, on need for regional air connectivity, one way to talk about is it has very strong backward and forward linkages. Something that we generally talk about in any infrastructure. Okay, so there is a general advice to you. Maybe next time they will not ask you on regional air connectivity but port connectivity or something else. Infrastructure related questions are common. One question comes from infrastructure. It may be on railways. They asked on railways and Triple P a few years ago. Sometimes on air, sometimes on ports, sometimes on highways, sometimes in general on infrastructure. There are a few common links you can always use. Like infrastructure in general has backward forward linkages. Backward forward as in it is encouraging certain other things also, maybe infrastructure or other aspects, and it may be having its forward impact as well. In backward linkages, you can give a number of examples. For example, you can say airport construction, airport or even heliport construction, etc., which itself is a big infrastructure. Without airport construction in the smaller cities, we cannot go for the regional air connectivity. So one need that you can say is that the backward linkages, it leads to more airport construction, it needs to more road constructions, because there must be road connectivity to the airports, etc. Automatically, two separate infrastructures can be linked with the regional air connectivity. Let's not forget, there are many other linkages that can be there in this case. For example, job creation. Infrastructure is often linked to significant number of jobs being created. Here you can go further into detail. Since it's 250 words, you have some more space to write. In job creation, you can talk about wage employment. Wage employment in the context of people who have to look after the maintenance of the airports, of the roads, of the other things related to the regional air connectivity, etc. Even self-employment. For example, the shops and other businesses being opened at the airport when the connectivity is happening. So it can be a big link to the job creation. It is, or in slightly technical language, you can say that regional air connectivity can have a bigger multiplier impact in terms of the employment creation in a country like India, which is already facing jobless growth. So that can be a big benefit of it. Overall, this question is not expecting you to criticize any of it. So throughout your answer, you should maintain a kind of optimism as the question is requiring over here. Okay. There can be forward linkages also. So what kind of forward linkages we can talk about? The mobility of labor. For any developed, for any country which is developing, mobility of labor is very important, mainly the skilled ones. Because in highly skilled labor, if mobility takes a lot of time, the businesses won't be open in the smaller cities, etc. Okay. So for example, the managerial employees to travel to the tier 2 or tier 3 cities, the regional connectivity is very important. So that can lead to an overall higher industrial development, services development in the smaller cities, etc. That is possible. Then another forward linkage can be development of tourism. In fact, in one of the aspects of UDAN scheme, we'll see that the tourism-led related destinations have been encouraged even more. Then other type of economic activities. Apart from this, you can talk about even other types of economic activities that can be facilitated with this. Then comes, so this was the first part. Roughly, I would say that 70-80 words you can spend. Not more than 70-80 words, because you still have to spend a lot of time on the features of UDAN scheme and its achievements. Okay. When we talk of features of UDAN scheme, then you can go through the different levels. For example, again, this is more data-based question. You can say that it was launched in 2017 formally, announced in 2016, launched in 2017. There are 4 main versions also, although the 5th version also is coming in, 5th to 6th versions. By now there are around 6 versions that we have seen of UDAN. So that is how you can discuss the UDAN scheme. Like the full form, I'm sure I don't need to tell. Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik is the full form of the UDAN scheme. So in UDAN 1.0, which was initially, there were 5 airline companies who were awarded with 128 flight routes to 70 airports. It would be better that you quote some figures. As much as you remember, you can quote it. Out of these 70 airports, 38 were newly made airports. Okay. Then in UDAN 2.0, 73 underserved or unserved airports were announced. If you don't remember the exact number, you can always give some approximate figures. In UDAN 3.0, there was more focus given on tourism related services. So in UDAN 3.0, you can say there were better connectivity, or there was focus on tourism routes. You can give examples like the flights to places like Khajuraho, Amritsar, and different other tourism routes were also encouraged during this time. UDAN 4 was, or 4.0 was mainly linked to the extension to the northeast districts and extension of air routes. To the northeast districts, hilly states, islands, etc. UDAN 5.0, okay, and recently we have even 5.1, 5.2, etc. So UDAN 5.0 was talking about focus on category 2 and 3 aircrafts. When we talk about category 2 aircrafts, we are talking about 20 to 80 seats based aircrafts. Category 3 greater than 80 seats. Okay, so some specific types of aircrafts were encouraged under this. And also the cap of 600 kilometers got removed. Earlier there was a cap of 600 kilometers within the regional connectivity that got removed. Okay, and then recently we have seen even UDAN 5.1, 5.2, etc. UDAN 5.1 talks about more helicopter routes. So not just the aircrafts, but also the helicopter routes. 5.2 is talking about tourism through smaller aircrafts, which is even less than 20 seats. To encourage tourism through smaller aircrafts, less than 20 seats. So all in all, these are the features that you can give in the aspects of discussing the UDAN scheme. And In this context means that in the context of regional air connectivity, how this is helping out. And then the final part was talking about its achievements. Somewhat similar to the features, but still you should be giving some figures if possible. So in case of achievements, you can write some examples like this. In achievements, you can write increase in number of airports. As I told you, features and achievements may be somewhat overlapping, but still, say from achievements talk about the actual achievement, features is about what was proposed. So as far as what is proposed is achieved, they are overlapping. From 74 to around 141. Okay. Out of this, 58 airports were earlier underserved or unserved locations. 58 airports out of this were underserved or unserved locations. Okay. Then it is ensuring commercially viable airlines also. You can give some more figures related to achievement in terms of number of passengers. Before that, increase in number of passengers. By around 22-23, the claim is more than 1 crore passengers have already benefited from the scheme, and the government estimates that in coming few years there will be around 14 crore passengers who will use it. Okay. Then you can talk about, in achievement you can talk about things like it has been affordable for the airlines due to government concessions. Without government concessions, the airlines wouldn't have gone into providing these services at a lower cost. So overall cost of operation is less. Overall cost of operation is less because the government concession is there. You can talk about VGF, viability gap funding, being followed. Due to viability gap funding, the affordable fares are there. So basically the 3,500 rupees cap was kept on the fares of the Udan scheme. And then you can even quote some unique examples like Lifeline Udan that was taken up in COVID times in 2020 to transport the medicals, to transport the cargo and essential medical services or medical services or cargo related to COVID in the context of the COVID pandemic. Another unique example in achievement that you can give is Krishi Udan. Krishi Udan is a unique initiative within the scheme and it's a big achievement. This is for better transportation of perishable agricultural goods. So some unique routes have been taken up where the perishable goods are transferred. So there are about 53 airports which have been selected for transporting perishable goods under the Krishi Udan. Some of the examples here you can give is like transporting organic produce from Sikkim to the other states has been done, or transporting seafood from places like Chennai or Visakhapatnam to the Far East. We have also in Krishi Udan some of the international flights carrying the materials like say Guwahati to Hong Kong, the transportation of pulses and vegetables, etc. So these are all can be quoted as the achievements. It was fairly a factual question, particularly the second part of it. And there is one question coming on infrastructure all the time, so you should be prepared for that type of a question. Maybe another time for port connectivity or something like that can easily be expected. So that is where I think I would be stopping my discussion of the economics questions. Thank you very much.